Hello, everybody. This is Brooke Warner, and I am pleased to be teaching for APSS Bookselling University. Welcome to my class, The 5 Ps of Publishing Success, and I am Brooke Warner. So let me tell you a bit about myself before we get started here. I am a publishing expert. I spent 13 years in traditional publishing, working for 2 traditional presses, and my last stint was 8 years as executive editor at Seal Press. And I left Seal to co-found She Writes Press, where I am now the publisher. I am actually the publisher of 2 hybrid imprints, She Writes Press and Spark Press, and I've been doing that for the past 5 years. We publish mostly fiction and memoir, but also a spattering of self-help and other kinds of books. And She Writes Press is a women's only imprint, and Spark Press is any kind of author as long as your work might fit our list. I am also the author of books that touch upon the importance of standards. Importantly, my most recent book, Greenlight Your Book, and my first book, What's Your Book? And today's topic, the 5 Ps of publishing, is adapted from my book, Greenlight Your Book. And so I'm excited to share it because I find that people enjoy it and it helps them to think about the industry and what is going on with their book in relation to the industry and getting published. Depending on where you're at in the journey, you will find something helpful in the 5 Ps of publishing. And you can find me online. I have a website at Brooke Warner. I'm on Facebook at Warner Coaching, and I'm on Twitter, of course. And so check me out. Let me know that you saw this. And without further ado, let's get started. And thanks for joining me today. So the first P that we're going to tackle today is patience. And this is an important one because so many authors experience impatience at various stages of the journey. You may, in fact, feel like you're being patient, but then as a result of having been patient, there might be an impulse at some point to want to hurry up. I find this a lot when people are writing a book that it's taken them maybe 3, 5, sometimes 10 years, and maybe the problem is that the authors don't necessarily see that as being patient. Maybe they feel like they haven't had time to work on their manuscript. And so finally, after whatever period of time, it's finished. And then there's this huge rush to want to be published. And I see this unfolding with authors all the time where they're telling me that they have spent 8 years writing their books and then they want to have it published and out next month. I call this it's kind of like the hurry up and wait phenomenon, but the opposite of that, right? Wait and then hurry up. And it's dangerous in book publishing because you don't want to approach things that way. The first bullet point here is that there is no magic bullet of success, but certainly one way to not be successful is to be impatient with the work, to rush anything like the editorial process, the publicity process, and publicity is one of the 5 Ps that I'll be getting to in just a minute. But all of this stuff takes some time, and you really want to educate yourself about this process. So patience is kind of a twofold situation because it's patience in the process leading up to publication, understanding what you're doing, educating yourself about the industry and what you're getting yourself into, building a team, making sure your book is well edited. All of those things do require patience, especially when you hit finish on your manuscript and feel like, okay, now I want this thing to be out in the world now. But the other part of patience is about your success or your measures of success and when that's going to happen. That's another aspect of being patient because this is a journey that looks different for everyone. And I think every author, in fact, once you finish your book, there's always that little niggling notion in the back of author's mind. Maybe my book is going to be a breakout success. Maybe it's going to sell tens of thousands of copies. And usually that's not going to happen on your first effort. And this is another place where patience comes to mind because most of the people who have a lot of success, whose names are household names, so to speak, have not been overnight success stories. They're usually people who have written many, many books, and then at some point along the way, one book might hit, and then all of a sudden they're known, and it seems to the readership of the world that, oh my gosh, this person just had this breakout success. But if you talk to these authors, normally these are not considered breakout successes for the authors. Normally these authors have been toiling away at their craft, at their careers, and then they ultimately and finally have a breakout book, and they have a lot of work under their belt, so to speak, to attest to how they got there. So consider that, you know, as you're looking at your idols and the people that you wish you could be like, that you may need to put in the work to do certainly more than one book. Normally they say in book publishing that the needle doesn't really move on a project until, or excuse me, the needle doesn't really move on, you know, your sales as a whole, or, you know, in terms of being a successful author until your third book. So keep that in mind as you're working, that this is a marathon and not a sprint. I say this about author platform, but it's certainly true of publishing as well. It's certainly true of being a published author. If you want to just publish a legacy project, that's one thing, and certainly great. I have no issue whatsoever with a legacy project that you are proud of, that you publish well. But if you want to have publishing success and really want to go out there and do something with your work in a meaningful way over a long period of time and become a career author, then it absolutely is a marathon. And this rushing thing just doesn't make sense. You can't rush it. I mean, you can, but the consequences are pretty dire for people who do. And so just keep in mind that you want to do things right. And you know, if things take a little bit longer than you might have otherwise thought or hoped, it's not that big of a deal, particularly if we're talking in terms of months versus years. Many authors come to me to publish, and because we operate with traditional publishing schedules, we're usually publishing a year out. And authors are often disappointed by that, saying, oh my gosh, I can't possibly wait a year. I want my book to be out 6 months from now, or I want my book to be out 3 months from now. And I try to talk them down a bit to say, you know, the difference between 3, 6 months and 12 months is not that big, particularly when you need to be thinking about other things like your author platform, and you can be creating content and getting yourself ready for publication to do it the right way. So it's often just a good idea to take a deep breath and to reassess and to, you know, see, are we talking about splitting hairs here when we're talking about the difference of a few months? I want to share a couple of success stories. And the reason is because it sort of points back to this idea about idols and best-selling authors and the notion that they're not overnight success stories, particularly with these first two. Mark Nepo is an author that I've worked with for years, and he got chosen by Oprah as one of her ultimate favorite things. His book, The Book of Awakening, was chosen by Oprah. He had been publishing for years at that point. Book of Awakening was 10 years old already when this happened. Now, of course, Oprah has the Midas touch, and this sent his book skyrocketing to the New York Times bestseller list as a backlist book, which is virtually unheard of. But what I want to say about Mark Nepo is that he was writing regardless, even if Oprah had not come along and touched him in the way that she did. He was a successful writer, not that level of success in his own right, and he was building a following, and to date he has written 20 books. It's pretty incredible. So this is just an example of a lifetime career author, and you just never know when these opportunities are going to come knocking on your door. You know, Mark was in his 60s when Oprah chose him for her ultimate favorite things, and he had been writing and writing and writing away since he was in his 30s. And so it's just to say, if you have this expectation that success is going to come knocking on your door, it may not happen tomorrow, but it may well happen in a few years, or 10 years, or even 20 years, if you just keep making sure that you're publishing the best work that you can absolutely publish. Christina Baker Klein, some of you may know her. She wrote a book called The Orphan Train, which is a New York Times bestseller as well. And the reason that I bring her up is because she too had written many books over the course of her career before The Orphan Train became her New York Times bestseller. She had written in multiple genres. You know, this was not a breakout success story. It was someone who was toiling away at her craft and really working hard. And then when Orphan Train hit, I mean, yes, it's every author's dream to have a breakout book like this, But again, there's so much oftentimes this notion that it's just this wild and crazy, unusual success. And I think the authors who have this happen to them will tell you that indeed it is not a wild hair. It's something that they've been working on. Leah Lax is someone who I bring up because she's a She Writes Press author, someone I worked closely with. And her version of patience is a little different. She was trying to get traditionally published for a lot of years, and she did all these passes, all these revisions on her books, basically trying to adhere to what the traditional industry wanted from her. And then every time she'd do the revisions, she was getting rejected again. And Leah finally decided that she was going to try to shop to independent presses, and she discovered through shopping to independent presses that she had a really niche book. It was called Uncovered, published by us in 2015, and ultimately decided to go the hybrid publishing route because the traditional houses were having a really hard time taking a risk on her. And I bring her up because she waited basically 8 years to find this right path for her and ultimately decided to take a risk on herself. Uncovered has done well for She Writes Press. It's sold over 7,500 copies just in print alone, and that doesn't count the ebooks, which have sold more than that. And that's a success story. And that was Leah taking her project into her own hands and saying, I'm not going to wait around for the traditional industry anymore. I'm going to do this my own way. And it was a successful payoff for her. The second P is perseverance, and perseverance is obvious perhaps when you're thinking about the publishing industry and what this industry is. I mean, it points back to some of these earlier things I was just saying, that it's a marathon and not a sprint. Obviously, you have to have perseverance to do a marathon. It is a lot of miles, and in some ways, each book you publish maybe is its own marathon. This is a really not something for the faint-hearted. There are so many different levels to being a published author. You have to write the books. You have to publish the books. You have to have a publicity team. You have to constantly be thinking about your marketing and your author platform and how you're presenting out in the world. You have to be constantly creating new content that in some ways that's not even about writing your book. It's supplemental stuff that you're putting out into the world. And when I talk about content, I'm also talking about teaching and sitting on panels and doing podcasts and other kinds of things, radio interviews, YouTube videos, blogging, social media. There's all these things, and that takes a lot of perseverance. It takes a lot of follow through. I know tons of authors who, for instance, start a blog or start some form of online presence, maybe it's their social media, and they start really strong, but then they abandon it. And that abandonment is a big deal because what they're looking for is instant gratification. And this is not an industry that gives you instant gratification because everybody is writing books. And so what's going to make you stand out, yes, is having a good book and being patient and doing it right, all of the things that I talked about in the first slide. But it's also about perseverance. It's also about sticking it out and following it through and not just saying, oh, well, that didn't work because I gave it 3 months. No, this is something that you really got to be in for the long haul. You have to figure out what your message is, what your topic is. And it doesn't mean that you can't switch topics. I mean, there's plenty of examples of famous authors who switch genres. I mean, Elizabeth Gilbert comes to mind. And she's most famous, of course, for Eat, Pray, Love, but she has written novels, and she has written a book of short stories, and she has written a self-help book. Now, granted, she's a big name, and she had the platform to be able to genre hop like that. But if you look at what she's done, it all coalesces. It all feels like part of her brand and her platform. And so authors who, maybe you write a cooking memoir, and then you want to follow that up with like a spiritual book, and then you want to follow that up with a children's book. That's hard. It's hard because the person on the outside might be like, well, who is this person and what is her brand and what is her message? So you want to be thinking that through when you're thinking about your long-term vision. How do all of the projects that you're doing fit together to piece together a puzzle of who you are? That is an important part of perseverance. And then make it your business to know is the second point here. And what I mean by that is to get educated about this industry, to know what you're doing and what you're getting into. A lot of people, especially if they hire someone, if they outsource, I think it's an impulse to say, oh, well, I'll just let that person take care of this part. Sure, but you do need to be aware of what's happening, whether you're publishing traditionally, non-traditionally, or self-publishing. You want to know what your team is up to and how they're positioning you. If you're outsourcing your social media, fine, totally okay. Still do a check, make sure it sounds like your voice, and curb your people accordingly if it's not really authentically you. This is another aspect of perseverance, just to get really clear on who you are and what your message is and how you are behaving and seen out in the world. Keep looking for ways to connect, engage, and be relevant. This one is huge, because you can write a book, but then it will just kind of plop into the world if you're not connecting, engaging, and trying to stay relevant. So this can feel hard for some authors who are like, well, I just want to write my book. Well, that's fine. But in today's world, you also have to have this perseverance, this additional angle into the world of your readership by connecting, engaging, and staying relevant. And you do that by writing content, all the things I was saying earlier, doing a podcast, putting content on YouTube, being on social media. You don't have to do all of that stuff, but you do have to do some of it. And part of this perseverance angle, this second P of publishing, is just staying the course. Staying the course, don't be swayed by whims and trends. Do the work that you're doing in the world. Don't try to adjust yourself just because it seems like the next guru or the next person who, you admire is doing something that you're like, oh, I should change everything that I'm doing and go that way. Yes, if it's measured and you have given it some thought and you want to tweak things, of course, but don't do it just because. Get really clear on what your message is, and it is this pushing a boulder up a hill. Sometimes it doesn't always feel easy, and sometimes you'll feel like you're toiling away and no one is listening to you, and you might get no comments on your social media and no comments on your blog, and it can be incredibly discouraging. But I promise you that if you stick with it, that will start to change, because you are building critical mass and you are building inventory, you are building content, and again, this is just this whole two points that I've talked about so far, the patience and the perseverance, is an exercise in delayed gratification, and that feels difficult at times, and so you have to find that strength and that motivation from within. The third P is author platform. Now this one is pretty straightforward. The author platform includes certain things. I list them here: expertise, contacts, social media, previous books, your existing readership and audience, your personality and persona, who you are in the world, how you present yourself, and finally your ability to execute and your aptitude. So these are the things that comprise author platform. So many times people just think, oh, well, author platform equals social media. It's not true. It's way bigger than that. The biggest and most important thing about your author platform is your expertise. Why are you qualified to speak on this topic? Why are you qualified to write this book? If it's a memoir, sometimes it's just simply the fact that you lived it, but it's important because you have something to say about it. And in truth, self-help is the same. People certainly have expertise because they've gone to school, and maybe they can write a book about parenting, or they can write a book about whatever topic. Maybe you think about things like social scientists commenting on race relations or something to that effect. Yes, they've gone to school, maybe they've studied and done a bunch of statistical research, but there are lots of different ways to be an expert. And that's even true for novelists as well. You can be an expert on your topic. You can be an expert on the things that you're thinking about, because you shouldn't be writing a book if you don't feel that you have any expertise on the topic. Even if it's just psychological savvy, an understanding of human nature, for instance. So consider what your expertise is and start to write on those topics. It's really requires certain people, especially I would say, again, the novelists, to think outside of the box about what their expertise actually is. But it can be a big game changer if you start to think of yourself as a go-to person, as a person who gets to opine on the topics that you're writing about. Contacts. is, the people who are in your database, and that is more important in a lot of ways than social media, because your contacts are people who have signed up to hear from you, people who have landed on your website and they are interested in what you're doing. I highly recommend a bribe to subscribe, which is when you land on someone's website and they say, hey, here's something free if you sign up for my newsletter. That's a great way to get people to take that action, to sign up and want to hear from you. And then try to make your newsletter offerings interesting. Don't just be like, here's my most recent blog post and leave it at that. No, try to engage people, ask questions, tell them what you're up to. And then if you want to share a post, that's great. Social media is somewhat evident just in terms of what it is for Author Platform. It just means being out there and engaging, posting things, and also commenting on things. Again, I can't say this enough, this whole marathon, not sprint. Social media is the same. It's going to take a long time to build up your social media contacts and likes and all of that stuff, and that's okay. You just keep at it and try to measure the things that move people. If you notice an uptick, well, what's going on? Maybe you want to experiment with Facebook ads. There's lots of different things that you can do, but this third P of publishing, Author Platform, I really can't overstate its importance. It's a big deal regardless of how you're going to publish, because you are really building a rationale for why you're the person to write your books, to speak on your topic. And then you're also talking about this readership and an audience that is existing, sure, but maybe you're in the process of building it, and you're going to continue to build it and continue to nurture it, and it never ends. You don't just get to be like, oh, I arrived someday. I mean, maybe if you're Oprah, or some huge person who has millions and millions and millions of likes, but for the rest of us, this is something that's ongoing. You just go, okay, well, I'm going to keep building my readership and keep building my audience. And that's one of the main points of being an author, of course. Your personality and your persona, I bring this up because this is an aspect of authenticity, just being who you are in the world, and that connecting in a meaningful way with people, and also connecting in a meaningful way with your book, that you're not this sort of weird split personality where people are like, I can't figure out who this person is. This book is so different from that book, and her website doesn't make sense to me, or his social media has nothing to do with his website. I don't get it. So this is, to some extent has to do with branding. And so if you're looking at all your stuff and you're like, this doesn't coalesce, get on that. Make sure that you work with a branding expert. Try to get everything aligned so that if someone looks at your social media and looks at your newsletters and looks at your website, it all connects. It all makes sense and feels like the personality of a single author. And then finally, the ability to execute and aptitude is a big deal. For a lot of people, this is where the fallout happens. They have all these ideas, to the point I was saying earlier, maybe they start all enthusiastic and then they fall off. The aptitude, it's, some people are just interested in learning and gathering information. And if you're not, don't beat yourself up, then build a team. If you don't want to learn certain things, surround yourself with good people. And so that is part of the ability to execute, is not to take everything on yourself, to say, I can't do these certain things and I'm going to hire someone who's really good. And that's part of the follow through, which goes back to perseverance. So some of these things kind of feed each other. But if you do everything and then you fail to execute, or you start strong and then you fall off, then you're not really doing it. You're starting and then it's going to be an automatic fail, because follow through is a huge piece of platform. So keep that in mind as you're going. Again, don't beat yourself up. Just know what you do well, and do the things that you do well, and don't try to do everything. For publicity, the fourth P, number one thing here is spend the money. I mean, that feels hard to some people. I get it. But if you're going to put a book out into the world, spend some money. I would say the baseline would be $5,000. That's may feel like a lot, but even if you are traditionally published, and even if you got an advance, I would recommend to take some, if not all of your advance, and put it back into publicity. The second bullet point here says hire a publicist, if not a team. It really does make a difference in the world of book publishing. This is a world where it's expected to see materials from a publicist. You have to follow up a lot and nag at people. And when you're the author doing that, it just is tough. I mean, some people have the personality for it, but most people don't. To be able to follow up on your own stuff and to toot your own horn and to be, both gracious in a sense because it's your own work and assertive or aggressive at the same time. I mean, that's a tough balance to hit when you are your own publicist. And then also, most people don't have publicity backgrounds. I mean, sure, if you come out of publicity and marketing and you really, really know what you're doing, you could represent yourself. But for the most part, I think it's highly important to get a publicist in your court. Nowadays, traditional publishers are just doing less and less and less for authors around publicity. And so many authors hire publicists to supplement the publicity efforts of their traditional publishing deal. And you, again, with regard to know what you're getting into, you want to ask questions. If you happen to be publishing with a traditional house, ask them what the publicity plan is. And if it is not strong enough, then you want to make sure that it is strong enough and that you are going to supplement it with your own stuff. In terms of hiring people, these are the third and fourth points here. Research publicists and do informational interviews, get references, and also trust your gut. This is going to be one of your primary people. It's a very important hire. So take time, check references, again, back to the patients, don't rush it, get bids, look and see what they're offering, and then decide how long you want that campaign to be. Is it going to be 3 months? Is it going to be 6 months? Some people go for longer than that. Importantly, you want to hire people in advance. Don't hire people after your book is published. I mean, some people have already made that mistake, and you probably know that it's pretty tough to get attention for your book when you're coming after the fact. So don't make the same mistake for your second book. You want to hire someone 3 to 6 months in advance, preferably 6, especially if you're looking to get some industry attention. You need that lead in. This is an industry that just has long lead times, and you need to play by those rules. And then finally, remember that your author platform is a precursor to publicity, and don't give that up when your publicity starts, right? So a team is taking over. That's totally great. You're going to have publicity. Don't drop your social media. Don't stop cultivating your readership in other ways. You want to still do all the things that you've been doing, and maybe even more so. Your efforts need to double when you hire a publicist, and the time that you're getting the most attention is going to be in the 3 months post-publication. So those are times to consider doing interesting things like campaigns or giveaways, and maybe you can work with your publicist to come up with some fun ideas around that. But whatever you do, don't just be like, oh, I don't have to attend to my author platform during this time. If anything, you're going to double down on your author platform, and in many ways, author platform and publicity really do work hand in hand in that way. You're continuing to build and nurture your platform as you work through a publicity campaign, and that's true with each subsequent book that you publish. Number 5, and finally, is prolificness. Kind of a strange word, but the idea of being prolific. In my book, I write about becoming a content monster, by which I mean get your content out in any way you can. Yes, this is, writing a book, but part of this whole presentation is about what you do when you publish. And there are many, many supplemental ways to do content. I've already noted some of them. It might be a YouTube video, or it might be a YouTube campaign. It might be social media. It might be that you start a podcast, or maybe that you just look up all the podcasts in your genre or in your area of expertise, and you get interviewed by those podcasters. But content is just putting yourself out there. It's writing articles, it's writing short stories, it's getting your pieces placed online and in literary magazines, whatever you happen to be doing, becoming a columnist. You want to think of all of the ways that you can get yourself out into the world. What I'm doing right now, teaching a class, that is part of being a content monster. It's saying, I have this content and I want to share it with you. And you're touching more and more and more people along the way and getting your message out there and becoming a go-to person in your subject matter. believe and embrace that you have a lot to say about your topic. I mean, this is huge. People sometimes are like, well, I don't have that much to say about it. I can't imagine, that I have more than a few articles that I might write. That is really narrow thinking in a sense. And if you feel that way, you want to hire a coach. There are lots of content coaches out in the world that can help you to blow up your topic, because there are lots and lots and lots of ways to enter into any given topic. And you may be thinking a little bit too small too, in that maybe you are only thinking about a single issue when your book in fact covers 3 or 4 issues, and deciding what it is that you have to say and different ways to say it. And that's part of being a content monster too, is thinking a bit bigger and not thinking with regard to the scarcity mentality or the I'm tired mentality. Prolificness is not about being tired, right? It's about finding the space to do your writing and to get really clear about what you have and put it out in the world in a consistent and measured way. This could be once a week, for instance. I'm not talking about, 5 blog posts a week or something like that. I do think content monsters should do social media every day, but certainly you could blog every other week. You can find a measured way to put your content out into the world. But this idea of being prolific is one of the 5 P's of publishing, because it's going to put you on the map in a bigger way. And as I say here, get creative about how you put content out in the world. Only do things that feel exciting / a little bit scary. It's okay to feel scared. It's great to feel excited. It's not good to feel dread. And sometimes people don't know the difference between scary and dreadful. But if you are dragging your feet, if you are not excited, if you do not want to do it and you're just doing it just because, your audience is going to feel that, so if you're just like, I don't want to do Instagram, or I hate Twitter, find other things to do. Don't force yourself. Figure out a workaround and try to get engaged around things that you're really into. If you don't like it and the dread stems from not understanding it, which I hear a lot from people, like, well, I just don't understand Twitter. It makes me anxious. Learn about it. And if after you learn about it, if it still feels dreadful, then don't do it. But if it's just because you don't understand it, you need to shift your mentality around your relationship to the things that you don't understand or may have been dragging your feet around, because you can change your relationship to these things. And then, as I say here, being prolific is both a state of mind and a discipline. And that just goes back to what I was just saying. You may need to change your relationship to how you think about your content. And it's a discipline because you have to find the time. You have to find the time to do the things that make you prolific. And that can feel challenging for people, especially when you're trying to write another book or you have a million other things going on, because you probably are an author, but you have a full-time job and you have a family, all the different things that are in our lives. And then it's like, and in addition to that, I have to be prolific, forget it. It's a discipline. So figure that out, map it out in your schedule, give yourself some space for it, but you will not be prolific if you don't think that you can be, and if you don't make time for it. And so I encourage you to get excited about being prolific. This is one way that you can put yourself out into the world in a big way, and your name keeps showing up around your topic and you become a go-to person in your subject matter. And that is really what all of this is about. The final bonus P, prosper. What happens when you do the work? You prosper. So that might look different to different authors, but set achievable goals. Know whether you're one and done, by which I mean one project and that's it. These are the legacy people, or if you're in it for the long haul. Know what you're doing. That's an important piece of this. Some of this might not pertain to you if you're one and done, and that is okay. Don't give up on any of the other P's. Just look at all of them as sort of a way of being in the world, a way of publishing your work. And I really do wish you all the best. If you've been inspired by today's session, please check out my book. I have a free chapter at the URL here at my website, and then Greenlight chapter giveaway. And I invite you to engage with me, as I said, on social media. I'm having lots of conversations all the time about book publishing. This is an exciting, exciting space to be in. So I hope that you all can harness that excitement, and that some of the things that feel overwhelming about what I talked about today will lessen over time as you wade your way into it. My biggest piece of advice here, as I was saying, it's a marathon, not a sprint, is also to wade in. Don't take too much on too fast. Pace yourself, and you're going to be great. All right, good luck out there.